And we're seeing
like
that shift now with Venezuela. I think that's really, keep your eye on that, because that's what the rhetoric, from what I'm hearing, that's a big focus right now.
Venezuela's been in a tough spot for 6, 7, 8 years at this point, ever since there was a coup.
So Maduro is just an illegitimate leader, full stop. I think after Chavez died, he kind of came to power and has never followed an election to let other winners, like what we saw in the most recent election. He's not willing to give up power. And that is a tough spot to be in, because Venezuelans have demonstrated overwhelmingly they don't want him. They're voted against him, but he's a dictator who will not leave. And so that's a challenging position to be in. But it is, Latin America is close to the US, and we have oil interests in Venezuela. And so, that's why the US isn't sort of sitting idly by, and it'll be framed, as being part of the sort of the anti-drug war. But it's more than just that.
Yeah, the drug war is a real thing, but it's not everything that meets the eye. There's always more interest than just stopping the fentanyl flow.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem. Yeah. I do think that there needs to be things to stop that stuff from coming into the country. We need to disincentivize that coming in. I had Ian Frisch on recently, a couple episodes back, and he just wrote a book with the only FBI agent to ever go undercover in the cartel, and amazing memoir, and really interesting. It's called Inside the Cartel.
Okay.
He's the only one to ever do it, and he did it for years and years and years. Really fascinating stuff, like how the whole black market peso exchange works and how they wash money and how these things all really work. And one thing that becomes clear when you look into this stuff is these are not just simple problems to solve, and they largely cannot be solved just purely by military action alone. Yeah. The cartels are very powerful. They would, the major cartels would be Fortune 500, if not Fortune 50 businesses, if they were legitimate. That's how much money they are moving. They have connections at the very highest levels of government, not just in the US, but in a lot of other places. This isn't just as simple as we're going to drop a couple of missiles on drug runner boats and go there. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Frankly, I think guys that are involved in the cartel, I do think it's appropriate to label them as terrorist organizations. I think that's appropriate.
I think it's appropriate to be very clear who we're bombing, and that's not apparent right now.
Yeah, like it has to be. We have to know. Again, we can't have these situations like we just talked about in Afghanistan, where a family gets bombed. This can't be a family out boating.
Yeah, or a fisherman or whatever.
I'd like to think that they're good, but we do need more information at this point. And this is another one of those things where I'm all about putting pressure on cartels. I hate what they do and they don't do any good on behalf of the world. I hate that. But what we're doing right now feels like we're creeping in on another undeclared war.
Yeah.
And that's where I get a little bit worried about, like, hey, what exactly are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
What are the stakes? And what are the goals, and how are we defining victory here? Yeah. Because this like perpetual, that's what the drug war has been since the Reagan years, right? It's this perpetual kind of the drug war, and you just kind of get this carte blank check to go do things for the drug war. And but what does victory look like? Is it zero drugs being imported into the US? Is it the like, I don't know what it is. And do I believe what the stated goals are to begin with? And this is immaterial to any administration, because every administration for the past 40 years in the United States has participated in the drug war in one way or another. So it's like, what are the goals? And then do I believe the goals that you're telling me? Because to your point, I don't necessarily believe it's just about drugs. Venezuela has too much oil for me to not consider that as part of the equation. And also the Panama Canal is a major
hub.
Like there's too many other things at play here for it to be just about drugs.
Yes. Yeah. There is, the US is just, it's not that altruistic, There's more to it than that.
There always is.
But earlier this year, I was doing some work in Mexico for a book project I've been working on, where I was interviewing a lot of moms whose children were disappeared by the cartels. And we're talking about a crisis of sort of
Hollie, you do some holy cow.
Yeah, so 150,000 to 200,000 people that are disappeared, that are just missing. primarily, from these organized crime groups. And
I have to assume that, sorry to interrupt, not just dead. I assume that this is a major feeder of international sex trafficking.
Yes, all sorts of
tell me what
trafficking.
You learned.
Yeah, so and each case obviously is unique, and a lot of these parents, some of them, their kids have been missing 15 years or so. To give you a couple of examples, one being one woman I met with whose daughter went missing, and it was during the pandemic, and so she sort of didn't have a lot of direct contact with her at the time because of all the different rules around sort of socializing, and her daughter had just started dating somebody new, I think, who she believes was part of a sex trafficking ring, and she was kind of lured in by his friend and another woman, and then she's just, I guess, never heard from her again until she got a message on Facebook one day that said, but your daughter is married. You'll find your daughter kind of in this mountainous area where they sort of call it. It's just outside of Mexico City, and it's a big area where they're often finding bones and other remains. But what was so sad to me, and this was years on, and then eventually, her mom. So each weekend, they call them collectives, and because they're really not getting support from the Mexican government. I mean, because the scale is so big, nobody bats an eye if they say, so-and-so's daughter is disappeared. That's normal. And sadly, that's normal. And it becomes the parents' responsibility to look for their child. So they join these collectives, I guess. And so they'll help each other out if they can. They'll go searching, these expanses of land on weekends. And a lot of the time, what's even more is that these women often get laid off their jobs if their boss finds out that they have a missing child, because the boss figures that you're going to be too focused on looking for your child. You're not going to do a good job. So you need to go and focus on your child. And so they'll lose their jobs on top of everything else.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a horrible crisis. And so, in this particular case, Jacqueline, her name was, she found some remains. She's found lots of remains over the years, but it did, turn out to be that some remains that she'd found in November of last year were her daughter. But, she's still very driven because she feels like she hasn't found all of them. So she's still very driven to trying to find out. But, she believes in, again, they do all the investigative work themselves. And it's so sad because these parents will come, and when I go to meet with them, they've just got these files of things that they've put together that they bring, of photos, of newspaper clippings, of just everything that they could possibly find, that they do themselves to try to piece together what happened. And in her case, she believes that, her daughter was taken in a sex trafficking ring and threatened and basically, not doing as she was told, and was killed as a result of that. In some ways, Jacqueline is sort of one of the lucky ones because she has some sense of closure, although it doesn't quite feel like closure to her. But there's so many parents also that I met with whose children have, were in another case. One was an engineer, and he'd moved to a different town to work and believes that the company, which is a major company still today in Mexico, does a lot of infrastructure work that has big contracts, was involved in corruption with the Zeta cartels, and which again, that happens in Mexico, yes, without having corruption. And so she believes, her son was, privy to some of this, and so he was kind of disappeared as a result of that. And that was a long time ago. Another one was trying to drive to Texas to see a friend who just had a baby. She kind of got contact from him at one particular checkpoint, and then he disappeared not shortly after that. And she thinks that, cartels will kind of will go to people and figure out what they do for a living. And if maybe they're useful, they'll kidnap them. In his case, he was a sort of a telecom engineer. And she said not long after that, these cell phone towers were disabled in this one particular area to enable the cartels to do more of their work efficiently. So, and then, they'll just discard you when they're done. And then another case that really just broke my heart was a young mom named Daniela, and she had 3 kids, and her middle son, Axel, had gone out one night. He he was about 16 and he had a girlfriend he wanted to go and see and give her a present to. It was a new girlfriend, and she really didn't want him to go, but he really wanted to go, and it wasn't sort of far away from where they were living in this village, and he disappeared. And she said that they were able to find footage of him and sort of saw that it was this one guy, in a hoodie who was part of a union cartel, which is a big cartel in Mexico City, and they basically will take young kids to be their drug mules because they're much sort of less conspicuous than older people. So they'll often, forcibly recruit children as they are to do this work. And then, that was 4 or 5 years ago, and just how demoralizing the search has been for her to be able to not get support. They're laughed at by police, and it's heartbreaking because she's there, and when I come in, she's wearing a T-shirt that she'd made where she'd screen printed her son's photograph on it, because she's just whatever she can do to try to bring some sense of awareness. And again, this is never going to be headline news because it is so common in Mexico for this to happen. And then a lot of the time, of these people, a lot of them, they might be American citizens or and yet, I just remember looking at that and thinking, this is no different to the hostage situation that was happening in Gaza. But this doesn't make the news and nobody cares. And why don't people care?
And this is in our own hemisphere. This is
our
neighbor.
Border. Yeah.
And a lot of people are Mexican immigrants here. They're, full U.S. citizens that live in America but have family in Mexico.
Yeah.
This is something that American citizens care about.
Yeah. And you just see the helplessness and the desperation and I remember, Jacqueline, who's kind of leading one of these collectives, and I remember she sort of looked at me as I was leaving and she said, nobody's ever come to ask me for my story or to interview me or to tell a story. I mean, that just tore me up because, they tore me up because I just thought these people really are so forgotten by their country, by our country, by the media, by sort of the commonality of what they're dealing with. And again, to me, being disappeared by these cartels, that's no different to what Hamas has done to the hostages. But it doesn't get attention.